As you'll know, we've got a great presentation coming up after our AGM. So this is the bit where you need to sit through and enjoy this bit, and then you'll have Peter's amazing talk on the Chilean finds. So that's coming up shortly. Hang on, let me just do that chat pasting that I was about to do. So here's dignity and respect. That's really big. Why is that coming through really large in the chat? Apologies. And that's hopefully smaller. Yes, statement of compliance, competition law compliance. Okay, so I'm Emily and I'm chair of the Finds Group. You can see the committee variously around me. Also, if you wanted to check out our bios, they're all on the website. As I discovered, you can just Google that, CIfA Finds Group, and it should come up. So that's a useful thing for if anyone's unfamiliar with who we all are. So we're going to start with our AGM. So this is the AGM is now open. Our first agenda point is minutes of the last AGM. Just a reminder to everyone that Googling Finds Group will also get you to all of our minutes. Oh, thank you, Cara. So you can find those all on our website. And I just want to ask quickly if there were any additions or comments on the minutes from the last AGM. No. Okay, can I just have a quick vote to accept the minutes of the AGM? All in favour of accepting the minutes of the AGM 2024? Okay. Anyone against accepting the minutes? Let's put all our hands down first, and then I'll ask that again, sorry. Oh, is that one person against? Oh no, quick, hands down. Okay, I think I can accept the minutes formally of the last AGM. So on to, clicking. Oh, there we go, I've already done that. There we are. Okay, so here's the chair's welcome and the AGM report. So welcome, everybody. What we're going to do quickly is talk about what we've been doing this year. This will also incorporate our secretary's report. So thank you, Becky, for getting that over to me as well. And then we'll talk about what we've sort of got planned for next year. Then we'll do the elections to the committee, and then that'll be it. So this year we've had 7 committee meetings, and we've also been involved with and supported several initiatives that we're really excited about. Particularly Historic England's Archaeology Mentoring Partnership. One of our committee members, Rachel Cubitt, has been really involved with this, and we've also got Phil Pollard as an advisor on our committee now as well. So they're very, very involved with this initiative, and it really aligns with what we've been trying to do with the Finds Group for ages. So that's really great to see. We've been supporting it through the Fringe event that was at the CIfA conference, and just generally advertising. Also, if you have anything that you want the Finds Group to advertise, any training or opportunities like that, do send them over to us. We also should take this opportunity to mention the sad passing of Phil Mills this year, who used to chair the Finds Group. Finds committee past and present were involved in and attended his memorial conference in September, which I hear was very good. So thank you, Phil, for everything you did for the Finds Group. In toolkit progress, those at the last AGM will know that we launched the Toolkit for Finds Pottery last autumn. Toolkit for Finds : pottery. So this brought the incredible standard for pottery studies and archaeology in line with some new guidance, and also made it a nice toolkit format that fits nicely with all of CIfA's other toolkits. It also provided some new resources, such as template recording files. So if you're interested in that, go and check that out. Myself and Peter Guest also worked on an update to the Toolkit for Finds reporting Roman coinage. This included updates to the Excel document to make it more stable, I believe, and also a video that tells you how to use it. So again, if you're a coin specialist, then check that out. You can find these by Googling CIfA toolkits if you're interested in those. Finds training has been a really big part of our sort of forward progress for the past year and for many years now. So we've been desperately trying to work towards a solution to, or solutions to, the fine specialist training crisis, which is born of us knowing that career paths in fines are difficult. They're difficult to get into, they're difficult to progress in, and they often end like unsatisfactorily without passing that knowledge on to the next generation. It's quite hard for people to find mentoring opportunities, which somewhat is being helped with the Archaeology Mentoring Partnership now. So some of the things we've been doing this year, we had a really interesting town hall with lots of representatives of many fines focused groups. We discussed the barriers of different models of fines trainings, or fines training options, how we could run it. We had a lot of good conversations, and the fines group decided to kind of focus our efforts on a number of training elements. So largely that is providing a hub for fines related training. So where people, we are a place where people can go, and we're a place that will shout about fines training happening. So again, if you have something like that, you can send that over to us. There's email addresses at the end of this AGM slide. And we're also aiming to run one in-person and possibly one online event each year as well. We're also continuing our data collection phase through the survey. Woo! This is for anyone who is interested in fines. You don't have to be a fines group member. You don't have to be a CIfA member to do it. We really want to know what the profession wants at all stages of a fines career. What training particularly is interesting to you, is useful to you, what would you prefer? This is just going to help us in our future endeavours of providing training that is meeting the needs of the profession. So providing or supporting. So let us know via the survey. It's about a 5-minute survey. It's all anonymous, and it'll really help us in the future to understand what people want from us. You've got until the 9th of January to do that survey. So if you've got a quiet moment in the betwixtmas, then may I suggest you use it to fill in the survey. Here is the link. Again, it's massive. Sorry about that. So yes, and I think Cara will probably send out an email to all fines group members. We'll also put it on our Facebook page and on our website. So lots of places for you to find that. Okay, what about next year? So next year we will be doing our 3-year plan, our new 3-year plan. We're going to be using those results of the survey to influence that plan. So again, have your say. This is a great opportunity for you to influence the direction of the fines group. We'll be having a newsletter probably in late January, early Feb. Once we've analysed those results of the survey, made our new 3-year plan, and we'll be announcing all of those in the newsletter. We are also, and then these are sort of like maybes. So we're wondering about doing a toolkit review to see how well these are being used. So we've put a lot of toolkits out there, but are they giving us what we want? Are they useful to specialists? Is there stuff we could change about them? Is the format right? So look out for that if that happens, but we'll be developing something possibly along those lines. We're also supporting new toolkits, kind of with a possible review in mind as well. I've heard whisperings of a possible CBM toolkit and whisperings of a possible lithics toolkit, but those are all very much in not even in prep yet, in whisperings only. So if anyone has ideas for toolkits, then do get in touch, and we can start to develop case studies for those toolkits. The most exciting thing that we want to talk to you about today, though, to look out for next year is Fines Fest 2026. This is possibly our most ambitious event ever, in collaboration with Historic England's Archaeology Mentoring Partnership. Hang on, I think I've got a poster that I put in 1 minute before we let you all in. Thank you, Phil, for this poster. So we're going to have a morning of talks, followed by a fines marketplace full of all kinds of specialists running stalls on their artefact or ecofact of choice. Plus, we'll be planning a poster competition, for early careers find specialists, and there'll be loads of discussions and expert panels throughout the day. It's not to be missed. It's going to be really exciting. The date is to be confirmed. We're just in final negotiations about that, but look out for it at the end of March next year. Location also slightly to be confirmed. We are hoping for Bristol. That is, at the moment, that's where we are. So yeah, really, it's an exciting time. The committee's been working really hard to put this together, so I'm really will be very excited to attend myself as well. Right, so we are on to our election of our committee reps. I want to do a big Teams round of applause for all of our committee members stepping down this year. We've got Peter Guest, Imogen Wood, and Deborah Fox. Thank you so much for your contribution to the Finds Group over the years. I've got the clap. There we go. We're delighted that Imogen is going to stay on with us as an advisor, so we're not losing that incredible knowledge base. Also, just a note to Peter and Deb, if you want to ever be on as an advisor, you're absolutely welcome. We would welcome you with open arms, of course. Myself and Becky are up for re-election as chair and secretary. And so could I please get everyone to vote on that, because you probably should. We are unopposed. So if you oppose this, then I guess we aren't unopposed, but please could you raise your hands for electing myself and Becky as chair and secretary? I can see Becky smiling. Okay, thank you, everybody. I think that's 14. Could we put our hands down, please? Is that everyone down? And now anyone against? It's fine. You can be against. Okay, that's what we like to see. Thank you, everybody. So Becky and I continue as chair and secretary. Becky's also stepping up to advisory council this year. Thank you so much, Becky. So yeah, expect to see her on AC if you are on AC. Oh, my stepping up has gone down the bottom, so that should sort of be at the top. But Ruth is stepping up to vice chair role. We're changing the committee structure around a little bit. We no longer have a treasurer, which was Imogen. Thank you, Imogen. But we're now having a vice chair. So Ruth is going to be supporting the sort of upper management of the Finds Group. I don't know what I'm saying anymore. So thank you, Ruth. We've also got Laura Ratcliffe-Warren, who was with us as an advisory position, but she will be stepping into an ordinary committee member position. We also have three expressions of interest to join the committee this year from Anthony, Aaron, and Joshua. The committee were really excited with your expressions of interest, and we'd really love to welcome you to the committee. So please, I'm really happy to have you. And we've also got Phil Pollard, who has joined us as an advisor, bringing a lot of historic England training and skills and knowledge to the committee. Please, could I get a show of hands for the new committee, voting the new committee in? Okay, I count 16. And everyone put your hands down, please. And this is any against? One, I think, still up from before. Possibly, no, there we go. None against. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll be sending around new committee bios. I'm really excited to meet our new committee members as well. I can see a couple of them on the call. Hiya. So yeah, we'll let you know when the first meeting is. It'll probably be late January, and I'm excited to work with you all. That, I believe, brings us to click any other business. So this is an opportunity for you all to raise your hand if you want to say anything to the committee, include anything in the AGM. I will also draw your attention though to the survey, where there is a box for that. So I'm not saying that you can't say it now, but especially if you don't want to say anything in front of how many people we got in here? 30-ish. Then yes, do you say so now? It is now over to our speaker, Peter Guest. Peter is an independent archaeologist and numismatist with over 30 years experience as a researcher, teacher, excavator, curator, and project manager. He specialises in the Roman period and is particularly interested in Britannia and the northwestern provinces, the Roman army and frontiers, as well as Roman coinage and the economy. Peter led the creation of the Toolkit for Finds Reporting Roman Coinage, and he's one of the co-founders of Villanova Archaeology and Heritage Solutions. I see you've already managed to share your screen, Peter. Thank you very much. Am I still sharing? No. Great. Take it away. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Emily. And hello, everybody. Good afternoon. After such an efficient AGM, a little sort of treat, I hope, an introduction, or at least a summary of some of the highlights of the finds that we excavated in Cillian back in 2008 and 2010. So a legion of finds, the Priory Field store building in the fortress at Cillian. So a little bit of background. There were 3 permanent legionary fortresses in Britain: York, Chester and Cillian, and I've been focusing or working at Cillian for the past 25-30 years, something like that, a very long time. This is what Cillian looks like from a bird's eye view for those of you who haven't been. You can see the River Usk down in the bottom right hand corner. That flows gently down towards the city of Newport, a mile or 2 further to the south of Cillian. So Cillian is a nice little town on the northern side of the city of Newport, and you can see here the outline of the legionary fortress shown in red, where what I'll be talking about is a project that we started in this field down here. This is known as Priory Field today. And as you can see, it's clear of modern buildings. So much of what we know about Roman Cillian has been generated by excavations from the beginning or the end of the 19th century through up until today, as Cillian expanded from a small medieval village into the modern town. So it's mainly the northern part and the eastern part of the fortress that we know most about. Up until around about 2006, we knew very little about the western side, particularly these 3 fields here. And in that year, I started a mapping ISCA project, which was a geophysical project looking at using magnetometry and resistivity. And over the next 5 years or so, we covered most of the interior of the fortress and also parts of the exterior too. But following on from those initial geophysical surveys, we then decided to conduct an excavation in Priory Field of one of the buildings that the geophysics had identified that we thought might be a store, or it could be a hospital building. It was a square courtyard building, as I'll show you in a little while. And that was a project I directed with Professor Andy Gardner from UCL. I was a Cardiff University academic at the time. And over the course of 10 weeks, we excavated the front range of that building, as you can see here, revealing about 70% of the building's main range, facing out onto a large yard, on the other side of which were 3 very large granaries. And as usual for a Roman building, particularly one in Cillian, most of the walls of the building had gone. The stone had been robbed, as you can see in the inset on the bottom left-hand side. Some of the superstructure survived, but not much. So on the main photo, the students are doing star jumps to show you where the walls once upon a time had been, which I can illustrate a little bit more clearly using these red lines. So we uncovered 7 spaces altogether, including the entranceway into the courtyard, a guard room and a probable stairwell, as well as 4 nearly square rooms, 1, 2, 6 and 7. And the illustration at the bottom shows the excavated area in yellow. superimposed on top of the geophysics and the reconstructed plan of what we now know was a store building. So those 4 rooms, 1, 2, 6 and 7, were little storerooms. They had beaten earth floors. They had very functional whitewashed walls, small windows, probably quite high up. And the excavation revealed the history of the building, what it was for, the kind of things that were stored in it, and what happened to it after the Roman period. The publication of that excavation came out earlier this year, May, June, I believe, and it's available as a paperback volume or an open access PDF ebook from the ArchaeoPress website, which you can see the link I've provided below. It's mainly, when you look at it, particularly when you hold it in your hand, it's a big finds report with some stratigraphy attached. And the finds, as I'll illustrate in a little while, takes up about just over half of the entire book. And we were very lucky to work with a range of find specialists, and I've listed them at the top of this slide here, who looked at the small finds with us and also the bulk finds, particularly the animal bone and the pottery, the Roman pottery and medieval pottery too. And below, I suggest why the report represents a number of significant firsts. It's the first publication of a major excavation in Cillian for a quarter of a century or a little bit longer. It was also the first excavation in Cillian that was open to the public, and we had a great deal of interest from locally, but also from far and wide in what we were doing. And remarkably, it was the first time in Cillian's very long, excuse me, antiquarian and archaeological history that an excavation trench had been positioned in Cillian to answer very specific research questions. All previous excavations had been undertaken in advance of house building generally, and so the trenches were where the houses were going to go. So this was a much more targeted archaeological investigation with very clear research outcomes and also with very clear benefits too. All of the, or much at least, of the finds discussion is contained in the mighty chapter 4, Finds Catalogues and Specialist Reports, which is where each of the categories of finds are discussed and described. But we were able to, by taking a carefully planned approach to the post-excavation process, sorry, that was a little bit quick, to widen out the discussion of the finds. And in chapters 2 and 3, there are a wide-ranging discussions or conversations about what the finds mean in an integrated sense, and I'll come back to that in a little while. So like most excavations of a Romano-British site, and particularly of a military site, the excavation produced a very large and diverse finds assemblage. We recorded over 1,800 registered artifacts of a variety of categories, over 5,000 sherds of pottery, 110 kilograms of animal bone, nearly 6 tons of CBM, 2,800 nails, etc., etc., etc. So what I'd like to do for the rest of this talk is summarize what we found and perhaps give you a sense of how we tried to, and hopefully successfully achieved, integrating the finds into, as well as the stratigraphy, to come up with a complete, or at least relatively complete, story of the building, the people that used it, and what it had been used for. So just concentrating on the registered artifacts for a moment, the first task was to quantify them in a very broad sense, and we did that in a variety of ways. Here you can see an overview of the RAs in terms of the materials that they were made from. So the vast majority, as you can see, were made from copper alloys with fewer iron, very few silver, and then, as you can see, also relatively large groups of glass worked bone and worked stone assemblages too. Where they came from within the building was quite interesting. Areas A and B at the bottom of the key are the names that we gave to the layers above the main store building itself. A was the 2008 excavation, area B was the 2010 excavation. So we can largely ignore those from here, from this particular chart. And when you look at where the finds came from in the rest of the building, you can see that the vast majority came from the entrance, with substantial assemblages from room 1 and room 2, and also from room 6 and 7 as well. If we break the registered artifacts down into their functional categories, and it's important to bear in mind that this is an approach that's been around for 35, 40 years or so, it's a useful way of exploring the kinds of assemblages that we're excavating. But when we do this, we're obviously attaching the object's original functions to them. And quite often we find that when we excavate these things, it's perfectly possible that their functions may well have changed. But this is a very good starting point. And as you can see, the largest groups of registered artifacts were military finds, with some very substantial categories from the assemblages from household and fastened categories, as well as coins. There were very few personal items, very few items related to writing or to hygiene, a few objects that were metrological, so weights and that kind of thing. But as you can see, primarily the registered artifacts came from objects that were associated with the Roman military, and also from household goods, by which we generally mean furniture and fittings, and also a huge quantity of fasteners of different types, which could be from household items, but also could have come from military objects as well. As I mentioned at the beginning, one of our key aims was to try and integrate the finds and the stratigraphy. And here you can see the kind of research themes that the finds were extremely helpful in for us. So we used finds extensively to look at the architecture of the legionary store building. Fortress planning less so. Chronology and context, I'll come back to that in a little while. That consisted primarily of the coins and the pottery too. But then the big research themes that were finds based were about military equipment, food and food systems, legionary consumption at Caerleon, which brought together the pottery, the animal bone, and other evidence too, to look at the kind of food systems that existed at Caerleon nearly 2,000 years ago, and then the post-Roman buildings and occupation. And I'll look at a little bit of a few of those in more detail later on. But to start with chronology and context, as Emily mentioned, I'm a numismatist, or an archaeological numismatist. And I was very pleased to look at the 200 and something coins, which, when you identify them and put them into a sequence, the usual chronological sequence, this is the pattern that we discovered, or that we saw at Priory Field. We have 4 main peaks of coin loss and coin recovery. And in general, this kind of chart would be used to discuss the economic history, or the, the chronological history of the building. And in this case, it's very clear from looking at the stratigraphy that what the coins are telling us is less about the economy of Caerleon, or the economy of the store building, and more about its structural history. So there are 4 phases of occupation, and there are 4 peaks. Each of those is associated with those, with the peaks and the chronological phases. And from this, we were able to say that the store building had been constructed sometime between 90 and 110 AD. It was substantially rebuilt or remodeled at the beginning of the 3rd century, before it began to fall down at the end of the 3rd century and the beginning of the 4th century. Before it was abandoned around about 350, there or thereabouts. If you want to compare Priory Field coins to those from other sites in Caerleon, as I've done on this chart at the bottom here, you can see it tells a very different story to the other 10 excavations in Caerleon that have produced significant quantities of coins. Fewer coins from the Flavian period, more coins of the later 3rd century, and far more coins than most excavations from the 4th century between 300 and 350. But it's important to bear in mind when we're thinking about doing this kind of thing, either at Cillian or any other Romano-British site, about methods, particularly methods of recovery. And Priory Field was the first and so far only excavation within the fortress that used metal detectorists or a metal detectorist. And so we are fairly confident that we have near complete recovery of coins from the area that we excavated, which is certainly not something that can be said for the other excavations that I show here. So the history of the store building, as I mentioned before, begins at the end of the 1st century. It's occupied for some 200 years, there or thereabouts, with a middle phase of rebuilding before it became derelict towards 300, and over the next 50 years or so began to gently fall in on itself, which for us gave us a very, as you'll see in a second or two, gave us a real interesting insight into what was going on in the 4th century in Cillian. The first phase of the first occupation phase construction contained a really important and large assemblage of animal bone and of pottery too. And here what I've done is you can see the kind of the way we've tried to tabulate different finds assemblages and tease out patterns from within those by arranging them both chronologically, which are the vertical phases, but also spatially, so the different rooms which you can see across the top of both of these tables. Room 4 is the entranceway, room 3 is the guard chamber, and room 5 is the what we're calling the stairwell. And as you can see from both the pottery and also the animal bone, the construction phases, phase 0 and phase 1, produced very significant assemblages of both of these categories of bulk finds. Around about 20% of pottery and animal bone came from those deposits that can be very closely dated, both by coins and pottery, to a 20, 30-year period of time at the end of the 1st century and the beginning of the 2nd century. Bearing in mind that the legionary fortress at Cillian was only established middle of the 70s, 74, 75 are the generally agreed dates. Much of the pottery and much of the animal bone was therefore less than 25 years old by the time it came to be deposited within our store building. And none of this material was probably originated from the store itself. It had come from elsewhere, and analysis of the animal bone in particular suggests that it had been it had existed in a midden somewhere, probably outside the legionary fortress. There was lots of weathering, there was lots of rodent and carnivorous activity on the bones as well, and also a fair bit of root action. So this material had lain somewhere else for a significant period of time before it was brought to Priory Field and deposited within the footprint of the store building. And the reason for that was that part of the store needed to be levelled up and raised because Priory Field is on a slight angle. So other material from elsewhere around the fortress was brought in and used to raise up the level of the interior of the store building before the first floors were raised. So these two assemblages are the only ones at the moment that we can use from Cillian to discuss the first few decades of occupation at this particularly important Roman site in Wales. And if you want to find out more, it's all in the in chapter 4 in the excavation report. But one of the highlights that we did, we tried to use as much science as we possibly could. As you'll see later on, we used carbon dating, but we also, for the first time, tried to use strontium isotope analysis and also organic residue analysis on the animal bone and on the pottery, respectively. And the strontium project or pilot project was really interesting, and we published that separately in a journal. Its title is On the Hoof, and there we explore animal origins And what we tried to do was to look at the strontium signatures of something like 40 animal bones, pigs, cows, and sheep/goat, and to try and identify where some of those animals might have come from. We concentrated on the material I've been talking about from the first phases of the excavation, and what this chart shows is that the animals within the grey band here in the centre of the chart could have come from the local area within 5 or 10 miles of Killeen, but that these animals at the very top, so both including cows, pigs and caprines, cannot have come from the local area and must have come somewhere that was highly radiogenic, and the most obvious locations for those animals are the southwest peninsula of England, particularly Dartmoor and Exmoor. And a number of animals, these shown in blue, can't have come from the Killeen area either, and those animals must have been raised on chalklands, which are the blue areas here, running from East Anglia down into the English Midlands, and also the southern part of England too. And so what we were trying to do, we've refined this in a number of other projects by using different isotopes as well, to provide a bit more fine-grained analysis. What we were trying to do here is to not just see the animal bones from Priory Field as interesting and important for the study of the store building or even for the study of the fortress, but to try and begin the process of looking at the landscapes around important Roman sites, and what the impact of having a legion of 5,500 men in South Wales might have had, both on the locality but also across the wider region, including in this case much further afield than we had expected. The occupation and dereliction of the store building, some 200 years after it was constructed, produced the largest numbers of registered artifacts, and the registered artifacts show a very different distribution, both vertically and horizontally, to the animal bone and the pottery I talked about before. So for these finds, 40% came from the episodes or from deposits that were related to the dereliction and destruction of the building, so from the period around from 300 to 350. These tell a completely different story, and the vast majority came from two rooms, from room 3 and from room 2 and room 7. And this is what the store building room 3 looked like, room 2 looked like once it had been almost completely excavated. And many of you'll see in this quadrant and also in this quadrant down here, there are scatters of artifacts, some single, some multiple, of iron and also of copper alloy that we excavated with the trowel as far as we could. And then we needed to consider how we best treated those and lifted them to try and understand what these blocks contained. So we were very pleased and very grateful to be able to call in curatorial and conservation staff from the National Museum of Wales. And the bottom right, you can see Evan Chapman, Mark Lewis and Penny Hill, who came out and worked with us for a few days. They lifted a total of 38 soil blocks from room 2. These included some that were quite small, as you can see in the inset, and some that were not so small, as you can see from this photo. This is soil block 1, which I'll come back to in a little while. And here you can see our 3 colleagues struggling to lift it out of the trench. It was then taken to the conservation laboratories at the National Museum in Cardiff, where a number of conservators, this is Julia Tubman, one of the conservation interns, were employed to excavate these 38 soil blocks. This is soil block 1. It took Julia 9 months, there or thereabouts, to excavate it under laboratory conditions, and this is the result of her work. Perhaps not the most photogenic of soil blocks that I've ever seen, but a really significant one, because what we're looking at here are a large number, a mass of iron plates, some of which are curved, some that have copper alloy fittings on, and that it became very clear as this work was progressing that what we were looking at here were a number of sets of the kind of body armor that Roman soldiers, Roman legionaries, were very famous for wearing, the lorica segmentata. This is a reconstruction by Peter Connolly showing Roman legionaries doing what Roman legionaries did, which in this case is fighting against Dacians. But you can tell the same story if you've got across Europe, including Britons, the tribes in Wales, and elsewhere too. So many of the artifacts that were scattered across this the room that I've been talking about, which was sealed by the roof and also the walls of that room, included this kind of body armor. It was of the Newstead type, which was, we believe, introduced in the early 2nd century and was in production until the middle of the 3rd century, there or thereabouts. So our dating suggests that some of this material was probably of some antiquity by the time the building collapsed in on itself, perhaps 200 years old or slightly less than that. And what we found was that the sets of segmentata had been partially dismantled when they were in the room, either to be recycled or perhaps to be repaired. And we discovered that many of the soil blocks seemed to contain plates of similar types, so shoulder guards, or chest pieces, or then the curved parts that went around the abdomen, as if they'd been dismantled and stored, perhaps to be used later on, maybe to be, as I said, maybe to be recycled, or maybe to be remade and repaired. We also found evidence not just for segmentata, so all of the soil blocks were x-rayed, and one of those blocks included this piece here, which once it was cleaned by the conservators looks like this. And it's similar to another plate, iron plate, that was recovered from the excavations at Carlisle, where it was attached to a number of copper alloy scales. So what we're looking at here is a plate that came from the chest of a lorica squamata, a scale armor set of armor on the front, which may well have been decorated by something like this. This came from another soil block, and I hope you can see it, but the emblem of the 2nd Augustan Legion, the legion that was based at Cillian, was the Capricorn, and hopefully you can see a lovely Capricorn, so the goat head with the fishtail here, outlined in punch dots within a border that may well have been enameled. This has also been cut down, removed from its original location and cut down, but it's possible that something like this may well have decorated the center of the iron plate that we're looking at here, giving us another sense that the room that we're talking about was used not just to store the kind of everyday military equipment, but perhaps sets that were seen as special for some reason, perhaps used in ceremonies, or other activities a little bit like that. And that impression was reinforced by one of the other very large soil blocks that we excavated. This is soil block 3 in situ. And it was when, as you can see, unlike the others I've talked about before, we don't have iron material here. We've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of copper alloy studs and pins and discs and all sorts of other things. And when I took this photo, I noticed that as I was taking it, this little chap was looking at me. There's this leaf-shaped copper alloy plate here with a figure, as you can see, a bust of a figure looking out at us. And once this was excavated, sent back to the National Museum, this is what it looked like post conservation. We have a figure wearing a Phrygian cap. He's a separate item. It's a stud that was attached to the copper alloy leaf-shaped plaque. His color, which is different, is because he is made of a gunmetal kind of copper alloy, whereas the plate behind it, the sheet behind it, was a more copper alloy. So they would have had a different color. And as we were working through this material, we were looking for what these plates and what these studs and other things came from. There were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of flat-headed pins, domed pins, larger studs of various kinds. And we noticed very early on that many of the pins were bent, and that they were bent, so leaving a space of about 3 or 4 millimeters between the bend in the shaft and also and then the back of the stud itself. Some of them, as you can see on the inset at the bottom, had a fibrous organic backing material, which using the scanning electron microscope at Cardiff University was identified as leather. So putting all of this evidence together, and by talking to other people at other excavated sites, we realized that what we were looking at was a decayed chamfron. There are a couple of sites in northern Britain that have produced these decorated horses' head pieces. You can see they were made out of leather and then decorated with a bewildering range of studs, domed eye guards and all sorts of other things. The other sites that have produced chamfrons are Vindolanda and Newstead in southern Scotland, and the waterlogged conditions at those two sites mean that the leather backing has survived, as you can see on this photo taken at Vindolanda Museum itself. The leather backing survives, and some of the copper alloy fittings also survived in situ. The Chilean example is the only one that comes from a legionary context, and here we don't have the leather, we just have the copper alloy fittings. And by looking at where they were located within the soil block, it seems that the chamfron, the Chilean chamfron, was also like the segmentata and also like the scale armor stored in that room, possibly had been partially recycled. But it's another example of another example of a piece of military equipment stored in room 2 that was presumably of some antiquity. These things are thought to date to the 2nd century AD, and that also would have been used for special occasions. And the special occasions might have involved the rider of the horse looking something like this, wearing, this is called sports gear generally, or sports equipment, and the rider in the reconstruction is wearing a helmet that's modelled on the Crosby Garrett helmet, and his horse may well have looked like either the Vindolanda example or the Chilean one too. We found a large number of non-military finds, as I talked about right at the very beginning, including lots that came from household items, furniture and fittings and other things, such as the fabulous lion-headed mount, which you can see down here. There weren't very many items from that we would consider personal. There were very few brooches, but some of them were quite late, including this rather nice 6-petaled flower brooch with enamel, red and green and blue, and this fairly fabulous iron fingering too, with an intaglio showing Bonus Eventus on the front. There are all sorts of other finds listed and described and discussed in the finds report. One of my favorites is this lead tag. We found a number of lead tags, not too similar to those from the site at Bath and elsewhere, where they're curse tablets. Ours were luggage, they look like luggage labels, or perhaps the kind of thing that you might get if you took when you take your washing to the dry cleaners or something. This one had been folded, and after looking at it carefully, it was unfolded and then cleaned. Roger Tomlin from Oxford University worked with us on transcribing and interpreting this, and this particular lead tag shows that it was attached to a bundle of some kind that belonged to Domitius Maternus, or Aurelius Severus, who was in the century of Domitius Maternus. And the reason why I like it is that it includes a Latin word that has not that is unique to Chilean, pingitarem, which Roger suggests might mean decorated or polished or something like that. So whatever the items were that were contained in the bundle that this lead tag was attached to had been polished and maybe decorated or were for decoration. Unfortunately, exactly what that was, we don't know, but we'll have to use our imaginations. And the other lead tags are all very similar. they show less information. It's more about this belongs to me or this belongs to that person, and presumably they were stored in various rooms within our store building, waiting for them to come and pick it up. In the process of which or some of these labels at least became detached and then incorporated into the archaeological record. The last Roman, or actually not Roman, phase of occupation that I want to talk about today is the post-Roman occupation, and I put post-Roman in inverted commas, and you'll see why in a little second. This shows the trench looking at the buildings that make up the post-Roman phase 4 of our excavated area. After 350, the legionary store building had not only collapsed, but it was deliberately levelled, and a series of new buildings were constructed on top of the demolished and levelled store, 2 of which are shown in the photograph here, and one of them was fairly complete. It consisted of it was a rectangular stone-built building with 3 rooms. The central room had a very large pit in its centre that produced a series of charcoaly fills that contained charred cereal grains and charcoal too, that we sent off for carbon dating. When we excavated this building, it sits between the 4th century and the 14th century stratigraphically. So we have 1,000 years in which to place our 3-room store building and also the other buildings that were like it. We suspected that it was probably closer to the Roman period than not, because it was stone built, quite simple, and also rectangular. But as we excavated it, we noticed that it didn't look like a Roman building that we expect in a site like Caerleon, because as you can see from the inset, the Roman walls weren't built on any foundations at all. They sat on top of the undulating surface below, nor were these stone buildings mortared in any way whatsoever. So they look Roman, but they also don't look very Roman either. And inevitably, I suppose, when you construct a building like that, it fell down. And here we can see the front wall of our building that we call Building 1 collapsed outwards. And you can see the different rows and courses of the building as they fell outwards. There's a possibility that we might be able to locate the presence of a doorway or at least one window, but that's really a little bit speculative. But anyway, this building was constructed on top of the demolished legionary store building, and without carbon dating, we'd only be able to say that the people that constructed it and lived in it and used it were probably living in that 1,000-year episode between the 4th and the 14th century. This is what post-Roman Building 1 looked like in plan and where it sat related to the now non-existent legionary store building. And the fascinating point about it is that from the material culture that came from the deposits associated with Building 1, we would expect that it was in occupation, or it was constructed and in use no later than 400, perhaps 410, 420, something like that, because the material culture that came from this phase, albeit it was limited in scope, so a small assemblage, was solidly late Roman. There was nothing that was either post-Roman or didn't fit in a late 4th century context. It was quite clear that the material that came from this phase wasn't just residual, churned up material that had come from the previous phase of occupation from the earlier building, because we had pottery and coins and other objects too that were later than the material that came from the demolition and collapse of the legionary store. But remarkably, of the 4 carbon dates that we sent off that came from the charred pit, which is connected to the rest of the building, as you can see in the slide below, the carbon dates indicate that this building was in use, and so people were living and building, or building and living in a Roman style building and using Roman style material culture at some point between 430 and 600. So after the Roman period, which is why the post-Roman occupation goes in inverted commas. They look Roman, but we're in a post-Roman phase of Britain's history and the history of early medieval Wales. And by looking at the dates in more closely, we can suggest that actually this building was constructed and in use and then fell down in the decades to either side of 500 AD, 475 to 525, something like that, which, if you're interested in your early medieval Welsh history and archaeology, of course, is exactly the same time as King Arthur was around. And one of Cillian's many claims to fame is that it's a candidate for Arthur's Camelot, or is suggested to be a candidate for Arthur's Camelot. Nobody's suggesting that our little post-Roman building was part of that or was even known to King Arthur. But it goes to show that for the first time, we now have a better idea about how Roman Wales and Roman Britain became something else later on. And the idea that there was this very firm cutoff around about 400 between the Roman period and the post-Roman period or the early medieval period needs to be reconsidered, not just in light of the excavations at Cillian, but also in light of other projects in Britain too. There is a tale, a Roman tale, that extends well into the 5th century and potentially into the early 6th century too, which archaeologically looks Roman, but obviously historically wasn't. And that's the end of my presentation. If you want to find out more about Roman Cillian or the other sites I've been involved with, then please go to my Villanova website. Thank you very much.